Joining us now is Jake Niall, as I mentioned, from The Age, as good as anyone to do the craft of journalism, if I've just butchered that completely. Jake, good evening to you and thanks for your time.
No worries, Kane. Gerard, good to be on the line.
Well, it's great to have you on board, Jake. Why don't we start with one of the most disappointing stories of the year, and it's grown teeth today, it seems, and that's the Hawthorn investigation. Where is that heading, and is there any timeline in sight?
Well, look, I don't think there's it certainly won't be done any time soon, from what I'm hearing. I mean, it's a bit of an unknown. There's been issues in getting some of the parties to participate. There's some that's quite public that some of the parties, that one represented by Dr. Judy Corton, there's a couple they've chosen not to participate, and there's also that's in the AFL process. Now they've all got the capacity, guys, to just go outside of the AFL system. I think this is something that we have to remember: is that the ex-players from Hawthorn and or their current or ex-partners, they've all got the ability to go outside of the AFL. The AFL's constructed this thing using a QC, Bernie Quinn, and three others, and they can run this panel and this investigation with Alistair Clarkson, Chris Fagan and Jason Burt, and indeed they can bring anyone into that. But the people concerned, the people who are making made the allegations, and we must stress they are only allegations, that they can go outside of that. And I suppose that right is also there for the coaches and the officials at Hawthorn at the time.
Do you think it's the biggest story of the year, Jake, or is there something bigger?
Well, it's the biggest story in terms of a seismic thing that's affected the game and a footy club at Hawthorn and certain individuals. Obviously had an effect on North Melbourne immediately and Alistair Clarkson, and it also has had an effect on the Brisbane Lions. It's one of these things, we're only going to know how big something is with the passage of time, Gerard. So we don't know. This could go on for years. But it also might not go on for that long and it might fizzle out. It's a little bit of an unknown. What tends to happen is in the AFL system is there tends to be deals done and people tend to settle. And that's I still think that's an open possibility for various people in this. In terms of it happened in grand final week, I would say it's probably had the biggest shock factor of any story. Whether it'll end up being as big, I mean, for example, if you compare it to something like the Melbourne tanking episode, the Melbourne tanking story was pretty big at the time. What was that, 212? But at the outcome, there wasn't a huge outcome necessarily. So the AFL wasn't able, a lot of that was Gillen when he was 2IC to Andrew Demetrio, they weren't able to get a very clean outcome. It was a sort of muddled thing. That could happen here. It may not happen here. There's a lot of balls in the air here.
Moving on, Jake, and we want to get through a few. The Federal Sports Minister has put a bit of a dampener on the potential for Tasmania to have a licence when she said of the $375+ million required, it's a big ask. Will the ask get delivered upon?
Well, look, the problem with the Tassie licence, you've hit the nail on the head, Gerard, that it's the money. This is about the money for the stadium. And Tasmania themselves kind of possibly miscued a bit when they raised that idea of a $750 million stadium, which would, potentially have a roof, and it would be down at Macquarie Point or somewhere around there on the waterfront at Hobart. And I think once that got raised as a pitching point, the AFL have then held it. And the AFL have been very good over the years at getting money out of these governments. The Tasmanian government's stumping up half. The other money has to come from the federal government in one form or another. And this crosses really party lines. And, of course, the member in that area, I believe, is Andrew Wilkie, who's independent. He tends to side with the Labor Party, but he's still an independent, and it'll be interesting to see where this ends up. It's not easy to get that money. I tend to think that Tasmania, one way or another, with the lobbying efforts, will get it, or get most of it. But at the moment, there's a bit of work to do.
We need a replacement for Gill. Jake, it's taking a while.
Yep. It is taking a long while.
Is it going to come from internal or external? Would your prediction be internal?
I thought all along it would more likely be internal. I think that's, if you look at people who know Richard Goyder, who's the chairman of the AFL and is the person who would have the most say in this, he's tended to go internal from when he was at Wesfarmers and he was the CEO there. That's the general view of people. So I'd say, obviously, Andrew Dillon, the head legal counsel, the footy people report into him. He's one of the front runners. Travis Auld, who has the broadcasting and the clubs. He does the club funding.
We know all this, Jake. Now tell me something we don't know. Who is going to get it?
Well, if I knew that, wouldn't I write it, Gerard?
Well, I know you're thinking about writing it on the weekend. We want to snip it off you. Who are you leaning to?
Well, if I had to lay a bet,
yes.
Right. So if I had to lay a bet, and I just want to emphasise to the listeners, this is not a binding position. Brendan Gale is the other candidate from Clubland. He's a standout club candidate.
Yep.
If I had to lay a bet, I'd bet on Andrew Dillon.
Okay.
But I don't have that word. The smoke hasn't come out of the Vatican, Gerard, and Kane. So until the smoke comes out, who knows? But if I had to lay a bet, he would be my favourite. But he might only be, if I laid a market, he might be $1.70, not $1.30.
Is he being?
I'm not encouraging anyone to bet out there. By the way,
is he being undermined by Gill's reluctance to move on?
I wouldn't use the word undermined. I would say that the process, the AFL have been slow in doing this,
yep.
and they're giving the impression that Gillon McLachlan is irreplaceable, which is certainly, he's been a very effective CEO in many areas. But that is certainly not the case. No one's irreplaceable in this world. So, least of all journalists. So I don't understand why this is. They're holding it back, and it doesn't seem to me to be all that complimentary to the candidates. If Gillon, once they make the decision, I would say this too. Once they make the decision, I think they should that the new candidate should start pretty quickly after that. Once they made the decision, I don't think there should be a victory lapse in this sort of thing.
Another massive story was clearly Luke Beveridge and Tom Morris. Now, for the first time, I read over the weekend that Luke Beveridge regretted what happened. He said he regretted what was done, where it was done, how it was done, and he regrets all of that. Is that the first time you've heard or witnessed his regret? And should he have admitted that earlier?
No, I think he did. To be fair to Luke Beveridge, I think Luke Beveridge, it may have been not exactly at gunpoint, but I think when there was a bit of a backlash to that before the Tom Morris comments that were then leaked out into the media took place from some time ago, things that he'd said about a colleague and things that he'd said in another forum that got him, the sack at Fox Sports. Before that happened, Kane, I think Luke Beveridge did actually make a comment saying that he apologised to Tom Morris for his comments after that game, which was the first game of the season. That was the first presser after the grand final replay game at the MCG where that occurred. But I think that the whole thing was unfortunate. The timing of stuff about Tom Morris coming out was, it did seem very much timed to Beveridge's comments. That's nothing to do with Luke Beveridge, but that was what people in this internet world, people can get cancelled quite easily for things that are in the past. And things that Tom said were completely unacceptable, as Tom knows. And Fox, in my view, had really no alternative but to sack him. And that was unfortunate for Tom, who's a very talented journalist and someone I have a high regard for as a journalist.
Best story of the year?
Best or biggest?
Best.
Oh, look,
as in a positive story. Best positive story.
Best positive story. Oh, look, I think that I think in a sense a development. I think Craig McRae and the way that Collingwood played the game was a breath of fresh air. Where defensive tactics, there's suddenly been a change in the game, and Richmond Footy Club guys deserve a lot of credit for creating a style where you go forward with the ball, you don't chip it around backwards. Fans have been saying this for ages. I think Stephen Hawking deserves, and the coaches deserve some credit for changing the way the game's played to be a more go-forward style of long-felt teams that go backwards. Yep. Metaphorically and literally, if you try to go backwards. And I think that McRae, being a non-Collingwood type coach in the sense that he wasn't a name, he wasn't a favourite son, he wasn't an ex-premiership coach, he was a guy that came through a process with Graham Wright, and they appointed him. and no one really knew what to expect. And he unleashed this style of play with a team that a lot of people thought would be down near the bottom. They ended up, if they'd won, if Collingwood had won that first final against Geelong, I'll ask you guys, what do you think would have happened? I think they were every chance to win the premiership if they'd won that first final against the Cats, which they probably should have won.
Whew, yeah, hindsight's wonderful. They were the better team on that day. There's no doubt about it. But we'll never know. They certainly would have put up a better fight than Sydney in a grand final, I reckon. Is Ken Hinkley the individual under the most pressure next year?
Individual, player or coach? Yes. Yeah, he probably is. Yeah, and you know that club better than me, Kane. If I'm thinking around coaches, that's probably right. I mean, all of the jobs, people who've been in jobs a long time, they tend to be under more pressure than coaches, obviously, who are new. I think the club under most pressure, not the coach, but the club under most pressure in some ways, probably Carlton. Carlton are a team, I think, that have enormous possibilities. And that top 5 players of the 3 key position players and Cripps and Walsh, is there a team that's got a better foundation to build a premiership contending team on? I don't think so. So Carlton have to play finals, and they probably should win a final.
Yes or no answer. Does Chris Scott get his just desserts? Yes or no?
No, he has not got his just desserts. But he got his just desserts in the sense that he won a flag, and Geelong have been outstanding.
Yes
Chris Scott,
or no was
criticism from. Sorry,
that's all we needed, Jake.
He was winding you up, Jake. Hey, mate, have a magnificent Christmas. I hope we can do this a little bit more with you next year. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks, guys.